Hi everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Paddock Pass Podcast presented by Fly Racing and of course Rental Street. If you need any accessories for your street motorcycle, then don't forget to check out rental.com where you'll find everything you need. Sprockets, bars, levers, whatever. Go and have a look. The brand is fantastic. They have everything that you need, not just for your off-road motorcycle, but also for your street bike, as we mentioned. We're gathered in this very homely flat, I would describe it, Dave, right in the center of Valencia. Right after the Grand Prix, in fact. It's Monday. We're trying to recover energy and some force for the test. Well, actually, not Neil and I, because we're going home today. But
there's only one person who's actually going to the test, and that's me.
You are manning the fort in the media centre. I was there today, so I can get a little bit of credit.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'll go half points, a bit like Moto2.
My name's Adam Wheeler. Of course, I write for OnTrackOffRoad.com, Telegraph, a few other bits and pieces here and there. I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. David Emmett. Dave, thanks for not only being here and contributing to the Paddock Pass Podcast note show over the weekend. You and I were the only 100% loyal, dedicated, consistent performers in this regard. And we hope our Patreon listeners love the material because we endeavour to bring all the notes, the views and the opinions, the facts, news, whatever, every day right after the race. And thanks for the moral support, Neil. Your half presence was very appreciated. And of course, Mr. Neil Morrison, writer extraordinaire, a man of many trades. Great to have you guys on the podcast again. The last one, guys. It feels like who was I speaking to the other day? I think it was Red Bull KTM team manager Francesco Guidotti, who said it felt like yesterday that the guys were only racing in Qatar. I was thinking it's slightly longer, or it feels longer than yesterday.
It does feel slightly longer than yesterday. It feels more like sort of 2 or 3 geological ages since we were racing in Qatar.
Yeah, the Qatar Grand Prix that opened this season, it's almost like it was 2021, actually. It's been a stretch. Neil, you've done more races than Dave and I. How are you coping?
Yeah, I'm coping, Ed, but just about. I feel like the well's a little dry. I was trying to finish up some work this morning, and when you just lack a little spark, a little bit of inspiration. But I think going home tonight and missing the test tomorrow will be of great benefit to me. So I know you're looking down on your nose at me, Dave, for that. But yeah, no, I'm feeling okay. Quite excited actually, thinking about a bit of free time, some holidays coming up.
I was at the track today on Monday and I was quite impressed by how they seem quite refreshed and ready to go and motivated for the next challenge. Jack Miller and Paul Espargaro were hanging around sort of the Red Bull KTM setup, the energy station there. The paddock, of course, is partly broken down because the Moto2 and Moto3 teams have headed home, but there's still like a full day's work. But we'll talk about that in a moment because we're getting ahead of ourselves. The last show of the year, the championship's decided. The decider has been decided. Pecco Bagnaia, first world champion, as we've mentioned, since 2009 for Italy. The first Italian on an Italian motorcycle in the Premier class for half a century, Dave. It was not unexpected what happened in the race, but in terms of entertainment value, before we get to our moments of the weekend, wow. I mean, it was pretty frantic.
The whole weekend was exciting. I mean, it was a really good weekend. Also, just because, the Pecco was obviously suffering from nerves and so was having a really rough time of it, getting through free practice. Then qualifying, Fabio getting on the second row, not quite making the first row. It had all the makings of an upset, which always adds that little bit of edge to the end. Also, we had the same sort of thing in Moto2 with Augusto Fernandez and Ogura. I think Ogura was on the second row as well, so he was in with a shot. It could have been there. So I mean, there was real tension, and the race itself proved to be quite entertaining. There was sort of some dry patches in the middle while the situation developed, but a lot went on. Really, a lot of things happened.
Neil, one of your moments of the weekend was actually those first crazy minutes of the MotoGP race. 27 laps, decent sunshine, great attendance, great crowd as well.
Yeah, 92,000 people there yesterday, which is I think one of the biggest attendances of the year. And I think, although it was always going to be super unlikely, I don't think we could really say with certainty that Pecco was the champion until maybe 5 or 6 laps to go, because Fabio was catching up that lead group for the majority of the mid-race period, and it was always going to be super unlikely, but it wasn't really set in stone until about 5 or 6 laps from the end of the championship. So I think that's a pretty good result, all things considered. Probably further than we expected Fabio to get this weekend. And yeah, if we're talking about our moments of the weekend, it has to be the second lap when the two guys fighting for the championship actually came together on track. There was contact. Bagnaia lost his front winglet on the right-hand side of his bike after he snuck under Fabio at turn 2, who had been pushed wide by Jack Miller. And then I think for the rest of that lap, they absolutely went at it. Fabio passed him. I rewatched the first couple of laps again last night as I was writing a report, and he repassed him, I think, 3 times, proper lunged, and Pecco managed to hold the line each time and get back through. And at that point, I was thinking, it's a matter of time until Fabio throws it at the scenery because he's just on the ragged edge. But to be fair to him, he kind of maintained his because it looked like all was lost then. But he sort of maintained his composure or regained his composure past Bagnaia and then set off after the lead group. So you do wonder, had it not been for that little spell with the Ducatis getting beat up by them, whether he could have actually maybe won the race. But he said yesterday that he didn't think that was possible, even without Ducati's kind of intervention. But it was great. The two guys, that's what you want to see, isn't it, in the championship decided. The two guys going for the title, scrapping like mad on track. So yeah, that was a pretty cool highlight.
Pecco Bagnaia said that the moment his front right side pod evaporated or flung into the air and Brad Binder immediately had to duck to avoid it bouncing off his helmet, the race was a nightmare and he was riding defensively from that point onwards. Fabio Quartararo, Dave, in his debrief told us, he was actually much more calm for the race, whereas he was much more nervous for qualifying because he knew that if he blew that fast lap attempt, which he had been on the ragged edge, all through Friday and Saturday morning trying to achieve, then his Grand Prix was scuppered. But it was a decent enough attempt by the Frenchman. Just a shame, his front tyre on the left side of it certainly wore quicker than he was expecting. Maybe that was to do with the higher track temperatures. Yeah,
this is a continuing problem that Michelin have to set the tyre allocation before the first Grand Prix. And I was chatting to someone from Michelin on Sunday night, and they said, imagine having to select which clothes you're going to take and wear at Valencia back in March.
Shorts, T-shirt and a hat, surely.
Well, yes, but we've also been here where you would have died of hypothermia had you only been wearing shorts, T-shirt and a hat. So, it's difficult. They did, because of previous experience, and also because this was quite early, they bought a slightly harder compound on the front, but even then, there were much higher temperatures than we expected. It's like 26 degrees or something, air temperature and track temperatures were, if I remember correctly, something like 10 degrees higher than last year, which is a lot. And so people were just basically running out of front tyre. And Fabio said, even after the contact, he was asked, the fact that you lost touch with the front group at the start, was that what cost you the race? He said, no, it didn't make any difference. The front tyre wasn't going to let me win. I couldn't do, I wouldn't have been able to catch them and stay ahead anyway. So yeah, it was and it was tough for everyone. We saw a lot of people with tyre problems. Race was 7 seconds slower than in previous years, which tells you, that it was that much more difficult.
Yep, that's what I wanted to say. I think it was 7-8 seconds slower than last year's race when the 3 Ducatis were up front, but I think you could attribute that to the track temperature.
Global warming, whatever, just a freak moment of good luck. I think next year, Valencia is scheduled to be around the end of November.
26, something like that. It's basically the last weekend in November.
That will be a case where I think Michelin's conservatism with tyre choice will probably be a little bit more secure, I would have thought. On the fringe of December, that really is pushing right at the barrier between autumn and winter. So it's...
We'll just scrap the morning sessions. It'll be all right.
Sprint race and through maybe some snowy conditions. But Dave, your moment of the weekend was a little bit more sombre.
Yes, really, Aleix Espargaro pulling in, I think, after about 3 laps, summed up his season, really. Couldn't have, or summed up certainly everything since the flyaways. Just everything went wrong. He came in with a technical problem. Afterwards, we asked him, do you know what was wrong with the engine? And he said, I don't know, don't care, don't want to know, just don't want to ever happen again.
The body language.
Yeah, he was not the most invigorated of bunnies. The problem, trying to interpret the press release, sounds like it's suffering from fuel starvation, which is, it's easy to do, but that's exactly the kind of thing that a mechanic makes a small mistake, which means the fuel isn't flowing properly. And so there's not enough fuel going there, and especially once you open the gas and try to give it full gas, it wouldn't respond.
We'll talk a little bit about Aprilia later in the podcast, but for my moment of the weekend, I have to go for the Guevara move on the last corner. I mean, sort of turn 14 in Valencia, we know, has been sort of home to some memorable moments. I think, you're going to correct me here now, 2012 Moto3 title decider, I think it was
13.
Luis Salom. 13, yeah. Maverick Vinales, Luis Salom, Alex Rins, all three could win the championship. All three went into the last corner, drag race to the finish. I mean, it doesn't get much closer than that.
Yeah, it was Folger and not Salom. But
okay.
Almost.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, there you
but
go.
But yeah, it was
that's
similar
why
to
I
that,
rely
right?
on you, see. That's why I need you. For my faulty memory is that everything gets on and on as the age pushes up. But anyway, going back to Guevara's move, we saw Denis Onchu quite distraught in Parc Ferme, understandably because he wanted to win his last Grand Prix before shifting sideways from Red Bull KTM Tech 3 to Red Bull KTM IO next year. But I was so focused on watching what Guevara was doing when he took that wide line, was obviously teeing up the run to the finish line. I didn't notice that Onchu had actually made a bit of a mistake and gone wide. That's why he was so disappointed, because he reckoned he messed it up. I mean, the finish, the gap between both of them was minuscule at the line, so perhaps that was the difference.
Yeah, but I mean, it was absolutely picture perfect by Guevara. It was absolutely perfect. It's exactly how you attack in that last corner. Because the person in front of you has to defend, they're always going to end up going a little bit wide, and so you can afford to take a different line. And also sitting behind, because there are sort of two lines through there. And if you can watch what the rider in front of you is doing, and if you know that you've got the drive, if you know that you've got the acceleration, you can sort of pull out and just pass that. So it was just perfect. It was just done to perfection. So yeah, hats off to him. Outstanding.
Yeah, great from Guevara. Like, brilliant way to approach the final turn, but another occasion where Denis Onju's in a winning position on the final lap and he doesn't just nail it like he had to. There's been a couple of occasions now. Aragon last year seems to stand out. Also, we had Jerez this year, where I think he was leading with about 4 corners to go and ends up finishing 4th. Jerez last year, where he was leading the majority of the race and ended up taking Jamamasio at the final turn. You do wonder whether, like, he's overthinking it. He wants it so much, and the fact that Kenan Sofuoglu, his manager, Toprak, Chan, his older brother, were all in attendance. You wonder whether that was just a little bit of extra pressure that he's putting on himself that is kind of preventing him from just sealing the deal. Because there's been several times now where Dennis has come so close, even this year, to winning, and he's not quite been able to do enough. Obviously, brilliant from Guevara riding like a champion, full of confidence at home track. I think he's won at every Spanish race we've had this year now, which is saying something. But again, I'm left with the feeling that Onju just couldn't quite get it completely right when he's ahead on the final lap.
Maybe he was slightly intimidated by looking at Chan. I mean, looking at his older brother, thinking, well, you won here on your first Grand Prix attempt in the rain. Pressure's on. Can I do it? Didn't manage it. So I hope Chan didn't wind him up too much afterwards.
But I mean, I must say, I'm not sure that having Kenan Sofuoglu as manager is the most calming and relaxing experience.
It's probably an intense way to live and train,
it's
isn't it?
Probably quite intense.
But just looking at the whole group of them actually watching the race on TV, it was, it was pretty, you could see the tension was there.
It's probably like the kind of journalistic equivalent of having Adam Wheeler as your editor.
Yes. There we go. Nailed it in one there now. Actually, guys, I wanted to ask about this because Pedro Acosta won in Moto2. And I can't escape the feeling that KTM have probably 2 of the brightest prospects in the whole Grand Prix paddock in Guevara and also Acosta, 2 riders who have yet to reach, their 19th birthday. Or is Acosta actually coming? No, he's still 18 this year. So, I mean, Acosta finished the year as Rookie of the Year in Moto2, won 3 Grand Prix. The way those 2 seem to ride, their technique, the bravado, the confidence, it's, dare I say, it's Marquez-esque. I really don't see anybody else at the same kind of level of control or ability or the way to affect a race.
I mean, Pedro Acosta won the championship in his first year. Fair enough. On a Moto3 bike, he's used to it. He knows what a Moto3 bike is like. He just has to learn tracks and learn to deal with the pressure of the Grand Prix environment. That is a very, very big ask, but still, it's not insurmountable. Moving up to Moto2 and then winning in your first year, that to me is always a big deal, because the step from Moto3 to Moto2 is absolutely massive. It's much, much bigger. I think Acosta was very unlucky this year with injuries. Was it? I think he was
femur.
Yeah, running motocross, right? Yeah, he was unlucky with that. That really set him back a long time. So yeah, and if he can adapt from Moto3 to Moto2 that quickly, he's going to adapt really easily from Moto2 to MotoGP, and he's going to be a great MotoGP rider.
How long does he wait, Neil? I mean, he's going to have another year in Moto2. I mean,
correct, 1 year.
I mean, unless there's a disaster and he has an injury again, which ruins a potential championship bid.
Nope. But not going to make any difference. I mean, sure, he can hang around in Moto2 and hope that he wins a championship, but he'd be wasting his time. He's better off doing 1 more year in Moto2 and going straight to MotoGP. And, he's not going to have to sit around begging and hoping. His attitude is really good as well. I saw that. I think at Aragon, I saw that he was sitting in his pits, joking with his mechanics, sitting on his bike, playing around with that sort of thing. That to me is someone who is really, really focused on the bike, really, really focused on the team, on racing, on everything. It's exactly what Marc Marquez does, is what Brad Binder does. He's being a leader in his team, and that's really important. And I mean, like, if it's me, I'm pretty much sort of after this. If I'm a MotoGP team manager, I'm phoning after the test, this MotoGP test. I'm phoning Pedro Acosta's manager and saying, about 2024, what do you reckon?
Well, he finished 5th in the championship, and KTM have a problem. Also, Augusto Fernandez has a problem. I don't quite know.
Oscar Bargaro has a problem.
Yeah, well, Paul's got a 2-year deal. So, in theory, unless there is some way that he could be ejected from Gas, or maybe
there's always a way you can eject people from teams. Contracts are great and everything, but there are always escape clauses. There's always ways of getting out of them, and especially if Paul, I don't know what his performance clauses will be, but one way of dealing with that sort of thing is by putting very high standards or requirements in performance clauses.
Speaking of contracts, Dave, I wasn't at the Leisure Spargaro debrief, but did anybody have the balls to ask him if he'd missed the €500,000 he probably missed out on for being top 3 in the championship? I
wasn't there either, but nobody asked him. But I think everyone had pity on him. I mean, he sounded, I was transcribing it, and he sounded as down as I think I've ever heard it. He did sort of like say, like missing out on third in the championship, because he felt like he had the speed just to easily get third. And Bastianini didn't have a fantastic race exactly, so third was absolutely on the cards for him. If they hadn't had this, I mean, it's just basically it's an error of the mechanics putting the thing together, causing this fuel starvation.
Speaking of Pedro Acosta, we've got him for a Renthal Street session coming up as well, so look out for that in the next couple of shows that we're going to do.
How are we going to put subtitles on an audio recording now? How is Pedro's English now?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Heavily accented, but then that's for half of the
good.
course.
Half of the course.
Yes.
It's good. He says finally a lot. Like too much.
Let's see.
Yeah, and Alex Rins, let's see.
But at least there's no let's see or no positive or negative, so I think
you've got to forgive the old cliche or two, certainly. And we're all guilty of it in our native language, never mind trying to do it in a second language. So, but yeah, of course, like we were saying. Rapid fire question to you both before we move on to our first talking point of the podcast. Bastianini third in the championship. Does he deserve that, or should have been a Espargaro spot?
Yes, he does. I think he does. He won more races than Espargaro. He was the faster rider over a year. He was in a satellite team on a year-old bike. Okay, that bike was fantastic and well-sorted, but that's still an achievement in itself. He was the guy that consistently, when Bagnaia was at his fastest and at his peak, he was the guy that was consistently taking it to him and being even faster than him. And for having just the temerity to not take Ducati's wishes into regard, even though he's going to their factory team at Sepang, at Misano, at Aragon. He deserves a championship for that, in my view. But yeah, he was. I think he was the third fastest rider this year.
Yeah, what Neil said.
But you say temerity. Is it temerity, or perhaps just not a very strategic way to think?
No, it's 100. It is 100%. Listen, next year I'm going to be your teammate. Next year you are going to be my teammate, and you are going to have to look after me. It's the only thing that matters. Look, there's no team. There is no.
There has to be some slight subservience to the reigning world champion.
100% not. No.
Right.
But as soon as you do that, if you've lost, you might as well not bother turning up.
Do you think he'll think I need to learn something from Bagnaia?
Oh yeah. Of course. I mean, he's been learning from everyone. He's probably been learning from Marco Bezzecchi. But I mean, that's the point. You learn from everyone. However, the first thing in your mind is, I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to show you that I'm better than you.
Now, let's talk about Pecco Bagnaia, the world champion. I know you've got sort of a thought on your mind that I think it's fair to say quite a few people, certainly in the first part of the season, were sharing.
Well, yeah, it was just a question to open up for a bit of discussion. Whether Bagnaia is a deserving champion, is a fitting champion for this year, because I think it's the first time that a rider with more than 3 DNFs has won the Premier Class World Championship in 74 years. 5 DNFs overall for Bagnaia.
I think Mark had 4 1 year. Okay. 4 DNFs. That's the top non-scores.
Right. Okay, but yeah, so there's inconsistency there. We've talked about this several times in the pod this year. He had a pretty rubbish first half of the year overall, but a pretty stellar second half of the year. He didn't exactly win the championship yesterday in the most convincing of fashions, coming home in 9th position after looking nervy and not really riding to his full potential. The Ducati guys, Davide Torazzi was saying last night, he could have been on the podium easily if he had approached it like a normal weekend, but it was almost as if his method of approaching it was just, let's not make any mistakes, and that was at the forefront of his mind. It was like, let's not repeat what we did at Sepang, where I crashed at 2 critical moments on Saturday and made the whole thing more stressful than it needed to be. He was trying to take a delicate approach.
Davide Tardozzi probably contributing a great deal to the amount of stress that Pecco Bagnaia was under, because the whole atmosphere in that Ducati garage was, I mean, like, it looked worse at Sepang, but it was still a proper powder keg. You could tell there was a lot of stress there, a lot of pressure.
Exactly. Just had to look at his heart monitor and the number of BPMs he was doing compared to Maio Meregali in the Yamaha corner. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously some. I have some contrasting emotions here. Like, I think if you take away Joan Mir's 2020 championship, he is the lowest points total of any champion in MotoGP on average per race since the current point scoring system was introduced in 1993.
I think he was 13.1. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mir was 12.
If you take the second half of the championship, it's 19. Which is exactly what you expect. And what was his points total? 272, I think. It's very, very low. It's, like normally championship totals are at least 300. And this was just absolutely nowhere near it.
But that statistic's always relative to the strength of the competition, isn't it? And also going by virtue of the fact that the the 6 top 10 finishes, closest finishes in MotoGP history have all happened in the last 18 months. Indicates that it's harder to win than ever. So we have to expect a degree of, we're not going to get a Marquez 19 season again for a long time, I think.
Yeah, I think Matt Oxley did a good blog on this after Malaysia. It is more difficult to be consistent in MotoGP now than it's ever been. And obviously the strength of condition of competition that you just mentioned, that is a big factor of that. Also the number of the number of bikes that are now within 10 seconds at the checkered flag is kind of more frequent than it's ever been. I think we've had 3 of the closest top 10s in history this season alone. So you have to take that into account. I don't think before we've had what every manufacturer has been on the podium this year. Every manufacturer has won bar Honda, which is kind of quite a revelation. This is the most sort of open it's been, although Ducati has been the kind of dominant bike, this has been the most sort of open era, I guess you could say, in MotoGP history.
Oh, and in the post-Rossi period as well, Dave, without Marc Marquez, I think it's really what you'd expect, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it would be interesting. It's always the counterfactual of taking a really dominant rider out of a championship is really difficult to sort of figure out, because those dominant riders completely change the dynamic of a championship. So yes, things will be a lot closer. But the other thing is, I mean, like, you do have to sort of, you can't overstate just how close everything is, just how close all of the bikes are. If you think, sure, there are 8 Ducatis on the grid, and actually all 8 of them are capable of winning races.
7.
That all 8 bikes are capable of winning races. I mean, like Fabio Di Giannantonio is clearly having what you would expect from a rookie season. He's sort of struggling and having. I mean, Digi's rookie season looks a lot like Pecco Bagnaia's rookie season, sort of thing. So
good shout.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you expect. Bezzecchi is having an exceptional rookie season. That bike is fantastic. That is already 8 bikes capable of winning. The Yamaha, at least in the hands of Fabio Quartararo, was capable of winning. The Suzuki, clearly capable of winning. The Aprilia was capable of winning. When you put everything together, it's just genuinely it's really close. Everything is really, really close. That I think it's really hard to overstate just how close it is.
The Ducati is the new Yamaha.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's also really easy to learn as well. The fact that the Fabio Di Giannantonio got on the front row at Mugello is, I mean, sure, he was helped by weather, but he was fast, and he's been fast a few times this year. So it's a bike you could understand and get up to speed quickly on, which you can't say of some of the other bikes.
Yeah, but if you look at it in another way, we're talking about low points totals, but we take into account that it's more competitive now than it has been in other periods in Grand Prix history. Pecco won the most races this year. He was on pole as many times as any other rider. He had more front rows than anyone else. He had more podiums than anyone else. You have to say the kind of numbers and just that run in the second half of the season does kind of, I think, merit the championship. And obviously, whoever finishes on top on points is the deserving champion. But I know there is a feeling perhaps that Fabio has been the better rider this year.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Fabio is the better rider. But clearly, that second half of Pecco's championship just demonstrates how good he is. Like he was. The only time he was off the podium was here. He crashed out of Japan. He probably would have been off of the podium there as well. It's just podium with a whole bunch of wins interspersed. That it just shows how strong he's been. The Ducati is very clearly and easily the best bike on the grid. No dispute about that. However, the Pecco has also been head and shoulders above the rest of the Ducati riders. I think we can argue whether Bastianini has more potential, but Bastianini was also making more mistakes. And the most interesting thing about the whole thing for me with Pecco is his crash. He said again in his press conference, and he said it sort of several times this year, his crash at the Sachsenring was absolutely crucial to his championship, because that was the moment where he sat down and thought, hang on, I'm doing something wrong. He figured out what it was and he fixed it. That's the sign of a champion. That's the sign of someone who's really, really knows what he's doing. Yeah,
and he said yesterday, I think there was maybe an hour after the race at the Sachsenring where he thought, the championship's gone. And then after that hour had passed, thought, you know what, it's still open. We still have a chance here, just because the bike was in such good shape. The potential really had been there since Portimao, I think. Obviously, he messed it up in France. He messed it up in Germany, as well. Yes, he's been, one of the guys competing for race wins pretty much everywhere since going all the way back to Jerez, which is a long old stretch.
One of the most interesting things also, because he talks about learning from his mistakes, and he very briefly touched on the situation where he was arrested for drunk driving had a crash and arrested for drunk driving in Ibiza.
Yeah, he worked out his weaknesses between the rum and cokes in the summer and managed to turn it around.
Yeah, exactly. A few drinks, quick drive, sort it out. No, I mean, but he did address it. Yes, he didn't actually sort of explicitly talk about it, but he did at least sort of mention it, bring it up. Yes, it was a mistake. It's the sort of thing that you do in life, that you learn in life. Doing it at 25 is perhaps not, is leaving it a bit late to be learning that sort of lesson. But I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Again, that whole situation was just handled absolutely terribly by GK, but that's a different, that's a completely different discussion. But it does seem like he's capable of, he's intelligent, he's capable of learning, capable of growing.
Yeah, and just, obviously we didn't see the best of Pecco at Valencia, but then he didn't need to be at his best because he had built up such a healthy advantage there. You look at the 3 races before that, and in each of those races he had ridden, I think, like a complete champion. Like in Thailand, obviously there was the rain, wasn't great in the rain before that race. This season, finished third, okay, with Zarco's assistance, but still rode a really good race. Phillip Island, not a Ducati track, but was leading the majority of it, almost won it. And then Sepang, I thought it was quite telling that twice this weekend, Mark, when asked about Pecco and whether he was a worthy champion, pointed to Sepang and said, you can't imagine how difficult it is to ride like he did in Sepang, put in that kind of performance with that kind of pressure in that situation. So, I think Valencia maybe not so much, but the races prior to that, Pecco was very much the guy to beat and the kind of champion in waiting.
That's why I wanted to ask him in the press conference if he feels he's a rider that can handle pressure, because I think the situations have been there repeatedly for him to drop the ball in a big way. Or, he seems quite a conservative character anyway. I mean, there's not a great displays of emotion, is there? I think he's kept this poker face all the way from Sepang right the way through to the end of, the celebrations in Valencia, where also, we didn't see a Nicky Hayden kind of just explosion of emotion and outpouring, did we? It was
more of an outpouring of emotion from Ducati than there was from Pecco. I mean, Pecco, he was quite clearly shedding a few tears after the race, but no, it wasn't. He's just not an exuberant kind of a guy.
Well, listen. Email us, send us a message, Paddock Pass Pod on Twitter. Let us know if you think Pecco Bagnaia is a worthy champion for 2022, and we'll share some opinions. But right now, we're going to take a quick break on the Paddock Pass Podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the second half of the Paddock Pass Podcast. Dave, Suzuki, they went out in style. Alex Rins won the best Grand Prix of the year by, a tenth of a second in Australia. It was only 0.3 in Valencia, but a faultless performance. I mean, we're talking about Bagnaia as a champion, but Rins really showed what MotoGP is going to be missing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was 5th on the grid. Got a fantastic start straight through to the lead in turn 1. And just led all the way, completely untouched. Very, very mature ride, very, very considered ride. He is the highest scoring rider in the last 4 races. I think he's got 65 points to Pecco's 64. Both Joan Mir and Alex Rins were saying, Joan Mir was saying, you can't buy this kind of publicity. You simply cannot get this. He says, we've got a beautiful bike. We've got a beautiful team. I've won a world championship. Alex is winning races. You just cannot buy this kind of positive publicity. And yet Suzuki are pulling out. The reasons they are pulling out is quite simple, because they're not just pulling out of MotoGP, they're out of MXGP. I think they're pulling out of AMA motocross as well.
Yeah, for quite some time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they haven't been in World Superbikes for the better part of a decade. They're withdrawing the factory support from EWC. I mean, they'll still be supporting the one of the Suzuki, and maybe Cert, I can't remember. They'll still be providing support, but at a much lower level. It's not direct factory involvement.
Well, apart from MotoGP, Dave, I don't think there's been any real motorsport technology development for a couple of years now, and it's certainly the case for off-road, where the RMZ250 and 450 has been stagnant. In fact, I think it's one of the motorcycles on the market, I could be wrong, that doesn't even have like an electric start. I mean, it's really basic stuff. We just don't see many Suzukis in the gates for the off-road disciplines at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly, because Suzuki build cars and motorbikes, they have, I think they just introduced a new engine in their road lineup, which is positive. It means that they will continue developing and building motorbikes, but their focus is somewhere else. They don't see the value in motorsports. I think it's a mistake, but I don't run a multi-billion-dollar company, which much to everyone's relief.
Motormatters though.
Yeah, but it's not quite multi-billion yet. No, I mean close, but not quite.
But my shares have lost value.
It's the markets, mate. It's the markets. It's not my fault. It's a bunch of bloody traders on Wall Street. So yeah, there's enormous value. There's enormous promotional value still in motorsports. I think Suzuki have just decided, from what I understand from people on the roadside, journalists on the roadside, there hasn't really been the passion for racing for a long time. The very top level have had really no interest in motorsports. I don't think they do much in rally or any other form of car sports either. But they're shifting their focus in cars towards electric vehicles, towards carbon neutral vehicles, and perhaps they'll come back. Later, but right now not. It also seems like a missed opportunity because MotoGP in 2024 will be running on 40% carbon neutral fuels, and in 2027 we go 100% carbon neutral. So then things start to get very, very interesting.
It depends on your view of how much of a token gesture the sustainability angle is with elite level motorsports that not only creates obviously 3 days or much more than that. It's a week if you consider all the support structure, arriving to a venue, the presence of all the public. I mean, it's quite a CO2 bubble, I imagine. But Suzuki do have this environmental policy, it seems, and it's made an attitude where motorsport is not the best vehicle for their promotion.
Yeah, but this is where I would disagree, because I think motorsports is exactly the kind of venue where you can do that sort of thing. Certainly when I went to the Ducati Moto E presentation earlier this year, what was really interesting was Claudio Domenicali being very enthusiastic about first of all MotoGP going to biosustainable fuels, because a lot of motorcycle manufacturers would like to be able to continue to burn hydrocarbons of one form or another. But if we can find a way to build hydrocarbon, combustion engines which are burning renewable fuels rather than fossil fuels, then that's already a big step. He was also extremely interested in hydrogen, in using hydrogen as a form of combustion. Obviously, electric fuels, which is what electric bikes, which is why they're going into Moto E next year. So to me, it really looks like. Because the thing that you learn about when you are at the very highest level of motorsports is, as an engineer, is combustion. Because combustion is actually not very efficient. It's about 35% off the top of my head. Every small gain that you make in terms of combustion efficiency has huge knock-on effects, and everything you learn there really goes straight back into production. So it seems like a wasted opportunity for Suzuki.
We have to do a podcast in the winter about the legacy of Suzuki. I mean, there was a time where an RG on the grid was the savior of the Premier class. I mean, it seemed to be littered with them in terms of being spec kind of production racers for half of the grid. I also have to apologise to anyone from Suzuki if my data on the dirt bikes is slightly off. It's been that long since I've seen an RMZ, which is a shame. There's been a rumour for well over a couple of years now in MXGP that Suzuki are working on electric technology for their dirt bikes. The Japanese are notoriously conservative when it comes to launching production machinery that has to be almost bulletproof. So I'm guessing they're doing a lot of R&D. If they do appear with that kind of technology, then it might not be for some time. But what's the point in developing a combustion engine? And the irony is that Suzuki were one of the very first in Grand Prix racing with EFI, with fuel injection inside their dirt bike. So they went from being one of the pioneers with that particular kind of engine tech to probably one of the most staid. And I think that has to be a speculation, of course, but an internal decision to orientate their development somewhere else. But I mean, talking about the racing, Alex Rins, it was. We could debate whether Brad Binder would have launched at him if he had another lap or two, but there's always the if question. But Rins, like in Australia, if you're LCR, if you're Lucio Cecchinelli, you're thinking, right, okay, good times next year.
Well,
certainly in terms of ability.
I'm not sure.
Let's check the Honda cynicism for a moment and assume that the Japanese will get that bike sorted out. But Rins is riding just as well as we've seen him.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the championship position might not show up, but I think this probably was Rins' best year. 2018, 2019 was obviously strong for him. He won 2 races in 2019, but you have to. Let's imagine that Suzuki didn't pull out of the championship or didn't decide to pull out of the championship at Portimao and then announce it at Jerez. He was leading the championship going to Portimao. As Dave just said, he was the strongest rider in the last 4 races. There was obviously a hangover from the announcement that they were withdrawing for a couple of races, which is understandable. Panic, I guess, set in a little bit, and he said he was unsure whether he would even have a ride in 2023, and that obviously affected him. It clearly affected Joan Mir worse than it affected Rins. And then he was taken out in Barcelona, a race that he had a chance of scoring maybe a podium at, and broke his wrist, and then that affected his races before the summer break. But if you look at since we resumed from the summer break, he was leading the race at Silverstone, then his tyres went off, and Suzuki were kind of at a loss to explain exactly what happened there. I think there's grounds to say that in the second half of the season, he was more or less, he was in the picture. There was a couple of races where he wasn't fighting at the front, but he was still scoring decent top 10 finishes. Aragon, he was going to be in the podium fight, but was obviously had to run off track to avoid hitting Fabio Quartararo in the first lap. I think this has been a really strong season from Rins. And he has succeeded where Joan Mir has fallen, short massively, in that he's basically been able to kind of put all that was going on next year to one side and the kind of uncertainty within the team, and focus on the job at hand. And I thought Phillip Island would be the send off. I couldn't imagine that he would be here again, leading a race from the first corner. Leading every single lap and winning, it was a phenomenal performance, really.
Well, he also mentioned in the press conference, Dave, that the most galling thing about the victory was that the Suzuki, with the extra top speed they had this year that we saw from the preseason test straight away, was probably the best version of that motorcycle we've had for a couple of years. It won the World Championship with Joan Mir in a very unique season in 2020, but the competitiveness bike was undisputed, I think.
Yeah, the where the Suzuki has struggled is just basically keeping up with technology like aerodynamics and ride-eye devices, that sort of thing. That's been their problem, but they've really done exceptionally well. Just in terms of a pure motorcycle, if we didn't have wings and ride-eye devices, you'd want to be on a Suzuki. The Suzuki would, I don't know about clean up, but the Suzuki would be an absolutely outstanding motorcycle, just in terms of it combines fantastic agility, it's strong on the brakes, it's got a strong engine, it's got lots of grip. You don't hear the Suzuki riders complaining a lot about a lack of grip or whatever. It's just it's a fantastic all-round motorcycle.
A little bit of a sensational thing to say, and maybe a little stupid, but if you're Razvan Razali, and the team announced a new sponsor, by the way, at Valencia, Cryptodata,
and co-owner.
Yes, at Kona, that's right. They were backers, of course, at the Red Bull Ring earlier this summer. The first time we saw this company, they are now the majority owners, I think, shareholders in the team. which is an unusual arrangement because they're not just slapping their sticker on the side of the bike. They actually are. They have negotiated with Razlan and also Dorna to, be more of a presence inside the team, I guess is the way to define it. But they're running Aprilias next year, and you just wonder if the last couple of weeks, the last 2 months, they might be thinking, well, clearly in the first 2/3 of the season in Aprilia, the RS was the bike, the emerging bike to have. But now you'd wonder, well, could we get a couple of cut price Suzukis as well? Chuck them in the back of the van.
Yeah, but you can't do anything with the bikes because the Suzuki's not going to build any spares for them. So basically, you'd be fine until about race 4, and then you'd be running around with bent wheels and bent frames and all the rest of it. Suzuki,
they look great in black though.
They would look great in black, but you can't just run MotoGP bikes. It's not like production bikes. Like if I want to enter World Superbikes, I can go down my local Royal Enfield dealer and get myself a nice Himalayan and enter it in World Supersport and see how far I get, which would not be very far. But the point is, all the parts are there. Everything, the rules are clear. Everything is all clear. All of the parts are available to all of the teams. It's very simple. MotoGP bikes are very different. MotoGP bikes need to be built separately, cared for separately, all the rest of it. I don't even think, because the other thing is, because of the engine allocation, we've got 7 engines, I think. There aren't 7 physically separate engines. What there are is usually 3 or 4 engines, and those engines are then circulated. They're just they're reconditioned. The most the parts that wear stuff like bearings and all the rest of it get replaced. Crankshaft, pistons, they'll all get replaced, and the cases are put back together. And it's not that these things are too complicated to be done sort of all on your own. It's you could not just think, I know what, so I'll tell you what, I'll give you $1 million for those bikes and let's go ride them.
It does make you wonder how much input for the old Desmos Adichis though, Ducati. I mean, there's obvious basic maintenance there, and if you're in the case of Enea Bastianini where you're making inroads in the championship battle or certainly the impact, then there may be some development. But otherwise, Diggia, how are they maintaining his Ducati? Are they just delving into the stock room of spares? And
yeah, I mean they've still got loads of spares left, and also it's also much cheaper to. I mean, it's relatively cheap to produce stuff which you've made 1,000 times. You've got all the CNC stuff sort of just lying about. It's still a very specialised job. Still needs to be done. But I mean, they do have one of the advantages of having 8 bikes on the grid is you've got an awful lot of spares lying around, and having satellite teams on old bikes means that you can actually use up old stock. And if you look carefully at those bikes, some of the bits and bobs on there are looking a little bit worse for wear. They're very clearly at the end of their mileage. Every single part on a motorcycle, on a MotoGP bike, has a mileage attached to it. It's good for a specific number of miles. That includes, stuff like footrests, swing arms, frames, all the rest of it. At the end of a year, a factory bike will still have they'll have several chassis with still sort of, I don't know, 1,000 Ks on the left in terms of mileage. Chuck it over to the factory, to the satellite teams, let them get on with it. They can then sort of shuffle around their various chassis that they've got to get the mileage out of it. So yeah, it's a good way of using up old parts. Obviously, there still needs to be a lot of support, but basically they're stuck with old parts, and that's what they have to use.
Speaking of mileage, Neil, I know it was round 20 and it's been a long old season, but it was invigorating, I thought, to see the Grand Prix at the weekend in Valencia. Again, how many people there were. I believe Dorna had raised the allocation of guest passes for each team.
It really felt like it. The paddock was the busiest I've seen since 2019, really. Although I have to say I wasn't at Misano, so I've got no comparison.
Yeah, Misano, I'd say, was busy, but it felt like there was certainly a lot of guests. I would maybe say VIPs, but there was certainly a lot of faces and renowned names from the motorcycling world wandering around the paddock. And I think one thing I want to ask you both about, and I know it's very a subjective thing, but the extra promotion that Dorna are making, I really have to applaud their efforts, because we do see things like the attention paid to TV graphics, the whole campaign around the decider, even though it was slightly loose because of the difference, a 23-point difference between Pecco Bagnaia and Fabio Quartararo. I mean, it wasn't really a head-to-head thing. It wasn't even as close as we saw in Moto2. But, you know, the effort to try and engage people, to make them excited, to build some hype around a situation in a season, you know, I think you have to take your hat off a little bit to that. And I think we got a little bit of a preview for what MotoGP is going to look like in the next couple of years at the Riccardo Tormo. And we saw a Heroes Walk, which is essentially like a red carpeted section at the bottom of the paddock. Maybe people who visited the circuit or caught it on social media or through Dorna TV channels would have seen it. Also, the sprint race format, of course, is something designed not only to give TV stations more material, but also the fans of the circuit more value for your buck. If you're going there for a Saturday afternoon, it's going to be, I guess, more exciting than watching perhaps Q1 and Q2, you would assume. And I just think there's been a little bit of a shift change in the mentality when it comes to the promoters in trying to build something around the sport. And yes, it can feel like it's over the top sometimes, and the social media posts can be hit and miss. But for the most part, I think it seems like MotoGP is a little bit more modern. It's got a little bit more vibrancy about it.
Well, I mean, first of all, the trouble with hype, I mean, an old cynic like myself, I'm extremely allergic to hype. So when they were trying to hype the decider, I immediately think, oh yeah. However, yes, I mean, you know, they were doing it. They clearly had a plan, a promotional plan, and they were following it, which was quite good. Again, introducing the Hero Walk is great. I think also actually being at the track, sprint races are going to be great. If you're not at the track, sitting at home, I think it's zero added benefit. They are doing an awful lot to try and promote the sport, but it seems to be at the moment they're focusing perhaps on the wrong part. They're trying to get more people into the, you know, they're trying to make things better for the people at the track. And what they need to do is grow the popularity of the sport. I think we've talked about this several times before. The problem isn't the people who are already out at the track. It's trying to get more people wanting to come to the track, trying to get more people watching on TV. That sort of promotion, that's where I think that we are missing at the moment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, who am I to say, but yeah.
Neil Morrison.
Neil Morrison.
I mean, I know it's been a long year, but you're Neil Morrison.
Thank you.
Neil, before we continue, I think we have to remember most of this stuff isn't aimed towards us, is it? I mean, even if we were not working there, we would be watching. You know, we would be talking about it.
Yeah, this is exactly the problem. We are hardcore fans. We're going to watch whatever, which again, and it's always the hardcore. I feel sorry for the hardcore fans because they're the ones who complain about format changes. But in fact, format changes, and this is not just true for MotoGP, it's true for any sport, any activity. Hardcore fans get taken for granted because everyone knows they're going to watch almost whatever you do. You do have to be careful. There is a limit at which that changes. But hardcore fans are going to watch anyway. What we need is new fans, and that's what always annoys the hardcore fans.
Yep. I think they need to get the Amazon series, get the TV crews back in and have another go. Try and do that again, because I think that's a great way to appeal to the mainstream, to people that maybe have a passing interest or know one or two names that exist in the championship but are looking for a way in. I think that's something that they really should be trying. Okay, the first series didn't really work. It didn't have its intended effect, but that is a fantastic medium to promote the series, to promote the characters within the series, to get people more familiar with the characters in the series. I think the stuff that you mentioned, Ad, is positive. As Dave said, it's not necessarily going to make the average person on the sofa start watching the sport religiously, but I think it is if you do pique someone's interest, if you promised them the potential to meet one or two of these stars at the circuit, then that's definitely a motivator to come to the circuit. Whenever we were at Phillip Island, there was a kind of a cool thing where basically the riders, when they were arriving at the track, they came into the middle of the track, and before entering the paddock, they got out of their cars and they'd sort of like they blockaded off the road into the paddock, and all the fans had congregated around the edge, and it was kind of like a red carpeted area. And the riders would get out of the cars, go up this little street or road up into the paddock, and basically, like, you know, spend 15, 20 minutes taking photos, chatting to fans, that kind of thing. And that's cool. Like, I mean, if I was someone like that, a fan, waiting to get a photo taken with a rider, I'd absolutely love that. I'd think, yeah, that's definitely a reason to get to the track for 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, when otherwise you would maybe roll in at lunchtime. So yeah, they're definitely trying lots of different things. I think you have to applaud that. You have to say it's good that they're willing to try different things, obviously mixing the format up for next year. But I agree with Dave. I think you really have to try and think of how to present this in a nice, watchable package on a mainstream streaming service, and that, I think, is one thing that they really need to make another attempt at.
That's the strongest part of the bow, isn't it? I mean, if you don't have that, seemingly now in the last 2 years, we look at basketball, we look at Formula One, we look at football. I mean, football is hardly a sport that needs extra or like diverse kind of promotion, because it's everywhere on a live basis. But
tell me about it.
You still have, these fantastic behind the scenes Amazon series, that take I mean, I've watched one of Manchester City. I'm not even a City fan, and it's quite revealing. You know, that's the kind of insight you want to.
Shame on you.
Is there one about Liverpool? There's not, is there? There's one on Arsenal, Spurs.
Yeah, there's one Liverpool.
Man City.
Anyway.
I wonder why they haven't picked Liverpool.
They did one 7 years ago.
Lack of charisma.
It was cringy.
Oh, right, okay. So yeah, it needs to happen, and I'm sure the reasons why they've frozen the Amazon project, MotoGP Unlimited, changed the name. There has to be some kind of review of that.
I mean, the thing is, there are so many stories in the paddock. I mean, like, I end up frustrated every weekend because I only manage to cover about 1% of what's going on. There is so much going on. There are so many different stories. There are so many different people. There's so much that can go on, but you really feel quite frustrated that they don't do more of that. It is just a way of finding a way. I mean, like all of human communication, humans live on stories. We love stories. Everything is narrative. You know, like, why are there so many conspiracy theories? Because people take a group of random events and connect them into a story. They connect them into a coherent narrative. And you could, if you came into the paddock with an idea to tell stories, not about MotoGP as such, not about the racing, but about the people. That, I think, is what's missing, because there's loads and loads of characters. Yes, a lot of the language inside of the paddock is not English. That can be a bit of a problem. But there's plenty of people, especially, there's lots of team managers who we all know who would be extremely colourful on TV and would be able to fill hours and hours and hours of entertainment.
Stories, Dave. I'm looking forward to you telling us more about how it was to live in ancient Greece from your experience there. Neil.
That's Socrates. God, he couldn't have go on.
Aristotle down the pub. I mean, good. Neil, last Grand Prix of the year. Who was your winner?
My winner from the last Grand Prix of the year was the man that won the Moto2 World Championship at Augusto Fernandez. Because there was a lot of pressure on Augusto. He was in the kind of place where it was his to lose, I guess. He had a 9.5 point advantage coming into the final race. But I have to say, I was really impressed with Augusto all weekend. I don't think he put really a foot wrong at any point. He was a bit shaky in the early laps of the race, understandably so.
Half a point. Half a point was the difference at one moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, for sure. But I always felt that Aguro was overriding at that point, and Augusto was just sort of biding his time, because he had done so much good work through free practice that he knew he had the rhythm to go until the end of the race. Aguro, I think, was a complete unknown, and was possibly likely to do what he eventually did and crash out in vain trying to win the race. But Augusto, I would say, if you're looking at how to win a championship in high stakes, high pressured environment, Augusto's weekend was picture perfect, really, and it helped that he had his teammate obviously helping him out. But yeah, chapeau. I think he earned the title with his performance throughout the weekend.
Very quickly, did you enjoy the Moto2 season this year? Last year we had two riders dominating things. It was like a McLaren-esque kind of season when it came to Red Bull KTM, who are team and rider champion for the second year in a row. But Vietti, Acosta, Ogura, Fernandez had the most experience out of all of those guys, but and triumphed in the end. But was it a season that grabbed you?
It was a season that grabbed me. I don't think it was a year when you look at the level in Moto2 and say it was the highest level we've ever seen in the class. I think we spoke maybe one of the podcasts earlier in the season. Certainly in the first half of the year, the race times were, quite a bit down on last year. Gardner, Fernandez, Bezzecchi, Lowe's, they were racing faster than what the guys did this year. We had 6 first-time winners this year, which hardly points to a dominant force in the championship. But you know what? That doesn't having a dominant force in the championship doesn't always mean it's enjoyable to watch or it's entertaining. I think this year was really entertaining. It was an open championship. We didn't have a massive number of fantastic races. I mean, you look at Sepang, you look at Barcelona. Wasn't vintage racing right the way through the year, but we had a really good title fight, and we had a lot of variety with the guys running towards the front, and some interesting stories there coming through. Some guys that will be in MotoGP were emerging, I think, in the category as well. So yeah, a good year, but not a year where you think like the level was fantastic, but a good year.
My winner is actually somebody who came through Akiayo's team, Brad Binder. I think his performance, he started 7th on the grid, which was unusually high for him. He was using a new chassis that KTM had for him, which, he claimed gave him the extra drive grip he had been asking for months. Reduced a little bit of the front end feel, but it didn't seem to hamper him in the race at all. Maybe the team had, refined it just as slightly for that particular 27 lap bout we saw on Sunday. But again, we saw just what a pure racing animal Binder is. And just quickly, Dave, I mean, you mentioned on the Note Show that you rate him, up there with the best riders in MotoGP. Yeah,
I mean, if I had to put my top 3 riders of top 3 most talented riders in MotoGP, it would be Marc Marquez, Fabio Quartararo, and Brad Binder. All 3 of them on severely compromised machines. But if you look at what they're capable of, it's just absolutely. It's really otherworldly. Binder is just, we talk a lot about in MotoGP about the difficulty of overtaking, but it looks like someone has forgotten to tell Brad Binder that it's supposed to be difficult to overtake, because he can do it. That new chassis does seem to give an advantage. It helps in turning. It's very different. It's basically the part, because the KTM chassis are these sort of steel tubes. I mean, they're sort of an oval tube. And the section around the swing arm pivot is completely different. They've messed around there. I actually happened, Niki Kovac, a photographer, managed to get a little snap of the thing sort of uncovered, and you can actually see it's very different. They've tacked a nice little steel plate over it to cover sort of stuff up, but that is quite clearly just camouflage. There's a lot going on there. That really helps with turning, which is something which they were really missing, and it also gave them extra drive. And turning plus drive will help you if you are and it's worth sacrificing a little bit of front end feel. You can get a little bit of feel back with suspension, with with your triple clamps, with front wheels, that sort of thing. There's ways of fixing that. So looking very positive for KTM.
The sun's kind of going down on the season as well as us here. For people watching video, we're going to be in the dark in the moment. Dave, quickly tell us who was your winner.
My winner is Gigi Dall'Igna, because he was hired to win a MotoGP championship, and it took him 9 seasons, and he finally did it. And he built an absolutely fantastic motorcycle. He's been building fantastic motorcycles all year. He's revolutionized the sport, much to everyone's chagrin. It is, it's just an absolutely fantastic job. He deserved this championship. Like Pecco Bagnaia, the second half of Pecco Bagnaia's season has been absolutely outstanding. But Bagnaia owes a debt of gratitude to Gigi Dall'Igna, because he's clearly on the best bike of the grid. The bike does everything the previous Ducati couldn't do. The previous Ducati was a very fast engine and a couple of wheels and some stuff connecting it, and it was left to Casey Stoner to figure out how to get it around corners. This bike is just fantastic. You don't even need to you don't need to look at at Bagnaia. You just need to look at how many people have been on the front row, how many people have been on the podium, how quickly Michael Bezzecchi got up to speed. It's a fantastic bike, and clearly Gigi Dall'Igna has done a fantastic job.
Could he be tempted to another manufacturer?
No. Well, no, because, I mean, the reason he moved to Ducati is because he had 125 titles. He had 250 titles. One thing that was missing was a MotoGP title. He's won a MotoGP title now. There would be no reason to try to tempt him. And he would never get the same freedom as he was offered. He was literally offered, I mean, I don't know about a blank check, but he was offered, a clean sheet of paper. Do whatever you want. Do what was needed. We need to start winning again. He completely reorganized the race department. He started shifting personnel between test team, race team, and the racing department, or rotating personnel. He completely reorganized it, and that to me was the biggest genius. Not so much not even the engineering changes, but just the way that he's been able to tap into Ducati creativity to build this a fantastic motorcycle.
On the eve of the first test of 2023, we're going to go into our losers from the weekend, and fittingly, they're all brands. Me, very quickly first, Yamaha. I think it says a lot that Yamaha issued a press release saying they thanked Fabio Quartararo for all of his efforts. It seemed an incredibly formal gesture, a slightly unusual one as well. Franco Morbidelli had... I'm struggling to think of a rider in the pack that had a more disastrous season outside of the rookies. We can talk about Raul Fernandez or Remy Gardner, but Morbidelli, from being a World Championship runner-up, goodness gracious, what a year. Yamaha going down to 2 bikes, of course, next season as well. You cross your fingers that the people in Iwata are still passionate. They still believe firmly in MotoGP, because we don't want to see them go the way of Suzuki. So Yamaha are my losers from Valencia. Neil, for you?
My loser, apart from Dave, because he's staying to do the test tomorrow, is Honda, because they had a shocking day. Paul crashed, Mark crashed, Alex Marquez crashed, Taka Nakagami finished 14th. Results-wise, it was a disaster. Also, just the feeling that I was confident that Mark was going to do well this weekend. I qualified in the front row with a fantastic lap on Saturday. I had him as my winner, guy that was going to win the race on Sunday. But, he just didn't really look capable of that. It sort of looked as though he was hanging on. Obviously, he had the crash, I think, around lap 10 at turn 8. And, what we're sort of hearing about what Honda is bringing to the test isn't exactly the kind of response that you would expect to the predicament they're in. And I'm not disputing the fact that Mark is the best rider on the grid, the most decorated rider on the grid by some distance. But Honda really need to pull their finger out in a big way. I don't think they're going to have a new engine for the test. Mark's been going back and forth from chassis, but keeps ending up on the older version that he's been on all along. It's clear that the aside from the swing arm, there's not been a great deal of improvement in terms of the hardware that they've brought. We've mentioned this before, but Ducati are so strong. There's going to be Bastianini on a factory bike next year. Yamaha should be stronger with Fabio. I mean, they can't just completely rely on Mark, because the last 2 races, I think, have underlined just the sort of struggles they had. Mark is fantastic at Valencia. He's got a wonderful record there. And even he was sort of powerless to fight against the 2 Ducatis ahead and Rins up front. So, I think Honda need to pull the finger out.
Dave, for you, your loser from Valencia.
My loser is Aprilia. We talked about it earlier. Aleix coming in. Maverick Vinales also came in. He had a problem with the front end. They had a really strong first half of the season, but things really started getting worse and worse during the flyaways. This race in particular, the fact that Aleix had to pull in with a mechanical issue caused simply by problems due to mechanics doing something wrong. There are serious organizational structural problems inside the Aprilia racing team. nothing which can't be fixed.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's more a subject of experience rather than resources.
Perhaps. Yes, exactly. But I mean, for that reason, the fact that they, I mean, it's been a really big learning year, and I hope that they use this experience to learn, to improve. But yeah, it's for me, that was very much a reason to call them the loser of the weekend.
Well, as we said, it's been a very long season. Thanks ever so much for listening to the podcast all the way through. Of course, we're going to continue. We've got content going on. We've still got 2 rounds of World Superbike. So Steve, Gordo and Charlie are going to be bringing their thoughts from Lombok and Australia, Philippine, and of course, the visit to the last round there. But we're going to have, as Neil mentioned at the top of the show, some very interesting interviews and rental street sessions coming up for you. We'll probably review the season as well, talk about some individual manufacturers, but the content will keep coming. So please keep continuing to check the channels where you get this podcast and listen to us again soon.